Good. Okay, first off, thank y'all so much for coming. Um, I've been teaching history since 2008, so it's always been a passion of mine. Social studies is a lot about history, but there are some things that we need to look at to make sure that you don't think it's just all about history. All right. So, okay. So we're following this outline here. So this is kind of what we're going to talk about. So let's just talk about the content breakdown. So it says the GED Social Studies test is 70 minutes. All right, it is the shortest test. So you don't have that much time. It consists of roughly 30 to 35 questions that assesses your ability to analyze, interpret, and apply information. All right. So, so a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know history. Well, just keep in mind that it is analyze, interpret, and apply information. That's it. It's just reading comprehension. All right. However, the topics are not just random reading passages like in the reading test. It covers civics, government, U.S. history, economics, and geography. And there are no breaks. All right. And we're going to talk about this here in a second. But what does civics mean? Anybody know what civics means? If someone asks you if you're doing your civic duty, what does that mean? Your civic duty. Civic. Like, yeah. So John F. Kennedy has a very famous quote. He says, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." So a lot of times people forget that there are things that we are supposed to do as citizens. We're supposed to vote. We're supposed to obey the law. We're supposed to, can't remember the exact verbiage, but help for the general welfare. All right. So there are things that we're supposed to do as citizens, and that's going to be some on the test too. All right. Remember, we talked about 70 minutes, shortest amount of time, 35 questions. So remember, if you had 35 questions in 70 minutes, how many questions, how many minutes per question is that, Mason? It's 2, right? So 35 plus 35 is 70. So pretty much you get 2 minutes a question. So this is what hangs people up sometimes is they try to, they try to get in depth. They really sit there and study this question. And while that is possible to do if you're a really fast reader, a lot of times that can hang you up. So I'm not telling you to go quickly through the test. I'm not telling you just to skim through it, but you cannot get behind because you don't have any time to make up. All right. There's different types of questions. Obviously, we all know about multiple choice. That's going to be the majority of it. However, there are drag and drops, and we'll talk about some examples with that. There are drop-down menus. So it's going to have a blank, and you're going to hit this menu, and it's going to drop down. And also there's fill in the blank, which I'm not sure if I've ever seen one, to be honest with you, a fill in the blank on the social studies test. Not sure what kind of question you would do fill in the blank, but hopefully you understand that fill in the blank is way tougher than multiple choice. All right, at least with multiple choice, you know the options. With fill in the blank, I mean, there's no telling. All right? So just remember those types of questions. What the test breakdown? How is it broke down? 50% is civics and government. So about 50% of this presentation, guess what? Is going to be about civics and government. Your role as a citizen, and also the role of the government. 20% is going to be U.S. history. I always say this line. I always say that the more history you know, the better you'll do. Okay. Like if you don't know any history, sometimes it can be tough because they're going to bank on you knowing a little bit of history. And we're going to go through some major events. So if you're not sure about U.S. history, obviously 2026 is right now. Does anybody know? You don't have to know dates, but we do kind of need to know some major events. We'll talk about that later. 15% is economics. Most of that is like supply and demand. How does that stuff work? And then 15% is geography. At the end, I'm going to show you this cool website that you can work on your geography through little quizzes. All right. Why in the heck do you think you need a calculator on the social studies test? I get that question all the time. I mean, it's a social studies test. Why are we needing a calculator? And we'll talk about that. And then remember, 145 is a passing score. Hang on. So if you get nothing right, if you're having a really bad day on the GED test, you get 100. All right. Let's just say you're having the best day ever, and you get every single one right. Well, that's a 200. You give me a red one. You give me red. For the students in class right now, does anybody know what you have to pass? What was that, Miss Marshall? 145. All right. So why do I say this? Why do I bring this up? Well, you should know because it's a test you're taking. But we don't have to know everything. We don't have to get 100. If we had to make 100 on this test, me and Mr. Mike and Miss Jamie, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. But we definitely would not be getting perfect scores all the time. All right. So try not to get too hung up on knowing everything. Obviously, it'd be great if you were up here in the 160s, 170s. I kind of wish our institution or some more institutions would give credit for if you got higher, because then that would entice students to maybe study more than just concentrating on a 145. It used to be 150, so a little bit tougher back in the day. So just keep this in mind. Whenever it says content breakdown, test links, different types of questions, knowing this will help you so much during the test. Sometimes students are like, well, I don't need to know that. Well, it's going to help you, and it's going to help give you perspective and maybe make you less nervous. So, and we're going to come back and recap on this. So, I'm ready, Mr. Jamie. All right. So let's see here. Civics and government. All right. So if 50% of the test, if half of the test is over civics and government, then we need to make sure that we have a pretty good understanding of that. All right. You see here. Click one more, actually, if you don't care. One more. So what came before? If I was to ask what is the supreme law of the land, anybody know what that would be? What governs our country? What is the supreme law that everybody references whenever something goes wrong? The Constitution. Very good. All right. You can kind of keep these dates in mind. 1776. I think most people know that we declare our independence. All right. We fight for 7 years. A lot of people think that we gain our independence in 1776. Thanks, Mike. All right, we do not. We just declare our independence. We fight Britain for 7 years. All right. So picture 2019, this is pre-COVID, all the way till now. And imagine us fighting for our independence for 7 years. All right. So 1783, we gain our independence. All right. And the Constitution, which governs us now, is signed in 1789. This 6-year period, it's called the critical period, because we have to figure out how to make all this work. How do we make sure that all the people that died during the American Revolution did not die in vain? How do we make sure that the authoritarian government that we were fighting against for 7 years doesn't just come about on the American continent? Uh-huh. One of the things I see a lot during the social studies test is this contrast between the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. All right. The Articles of Confederation is what we were governed during this time and also into this critical period. All right. So this is the way. Whenever we declare our independence, we say we're our own country. So we have to have something that governs the 13 colonies. All right. It was a good document, but it had flaws. All right. So as you see, all states had to agree to amend the document. Each state got one vote. Congress, the only branch of the federal government, was Congress. And they were dependent on states. Kind of a really complicated arbitrary system. Full sovereignty, all the states. And 9 out of 13 states needed to approve a new law to pass it. So, the Articles of Confederation, who has the power? The states. And why did they do that? Why did they do that? Because they wanted to decentralize power. So if there's one tip I can give you during the social studies test, is if you're ever taking it and it says, hey, there's this power right here. Should power be concentrated, which means kind of pulled to one, or should power be spread out? Should it be decentralized? And the answer to this is always decentralized. Okay? So you don't want all the power in one person or one entity. It's great if that person or entity is very honest and a good person. But as we've seen through history, that's not always possible, right, Mr. James? So if everybody was honest and no one was greedy, then you could have all the power in one person. And there's actually people that wanted to make George Washington the king. Yeah, they're like, hey, England has a king. How about... So Congress has a king, or Britain has a king. Why do we not just do that? Why don't we just go back to that? Well, the founding fathers, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Franklin, they understood this concept. You cannot put power in one person. King George III was the king of England during the Revolution. And Mason, if you would have asked King George III why he was king, what do you think he would have said? Mr. James, do you know? If you were to ask King George III in 1783, why is he the king of England? What would he have said? God chose me. Okay? I have a divine right from heaven. Okay? Because that's the only way that you could differentiate yourself from a peasant. Like, why are you a peasant and why am I king? Well, it's because God favored me and my family. And that's how come the son of the king became the king. All right. So, 1783, we fight for our independence. They give all the power to the states because they're like, we don't want that. All right. For 7 years, we fight, and then for 6 years, there's this political fight over what do we do? Do we just keep what we had, or do we come up with something new? And thank goodness that there was people, founding fathers, that knew you have to have some kind of centralized government. Okay? Keep this in mind. During this time, all the states, they printed their own money. Could you imagine even today if each state had its own currency? How that would be? So that's just one example of why you have to have some kind of centralization. You have to have some, but obviously we know what happens whenever it gets too much. So they get together. There's things called the Constitutional Convention, where they all get together and they sign the document. So what does the U.S. Constitution do? How is it different than the Articles of Confederation? All right, go back. Go back to. We're going to be flipping back between a couple of these. So one of the main things that I just want to talk about today is the branches of the federal government. Definitely going to be some kind of question regarding these branches. So just like we said, power has to be spread out. So they're like, okay, instead of it being in a king, instead of it being in one place, we're going to spread this power out into 3 places: the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. All right. This is the U.S. Congress. They're the ones that run the legislative. The President of the United States runs the executive, and the Supreme Court runs the judicial. So they're like, look, if we break this up into third, and third, then theoretically, this government will never get too powerful to infringe upon our rights. Right. And let's just go through some of this. So what is Congress's job? Congress's job is to make law. That's it. All right. What does the president do? He signs and enforces the law. And then if there's any issue, right? So we have the freedom we have the freedom of assembly. So we can get together if we want to as groups of people. If some law comes about and somehow it gets through Congress and somehow it gets past the president, then the Supreme Court theoretically is there to say no, that is unconstitutional because the Constitution says this. All right? And this is pretty unique. You know, a lot of people think around the world that all these countries kind of have what we have. And they may have some forms of it, and it may be like out in the ethos. It may just be like out in the ether, but it's not written down. And that's one thing that I'm so glad that they did is they wrote this stuff down. So there's no question. Congress makes laws. Anytime every time a new president comes, he or she usually appoints its own people. Congress's job is to approve those. You get 2 senators from each state, and then so you have senators, but then you have representatives. There's 435 representatives and 100 senators. So there are 535 people that are chosen to go to Washington and represent us. Here in Arkansas, we have 2 senators, and we have 4 representatives. So come 2028, whenever we have another presidential election, and they say that Arkansas has 6 electoral votes, that's how we get there. And then whenever California says they have 53, I think. Now we have 2 senators, right? But that shows you the difference in population, because these representatives are based off population. So the bigger states have more representatives. All right. So just keep this concept in mind during the social studies test of these 3 branches of the federal government, because they're going to ask you a question somehow, some way that ties into this. All right. Yes, sir.
It's 2 senators per state.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's why we have. Does anybody know what the term? What do we do to help make sure those numbers are right? Like every 10 years. What do we do every 10 years? a census. So why? Nah, it's every 10 years. Yeah. So why does the government come around every 10 years and try to count everybody? Is because they have to know this representation. They have to know how many people Arkansas has. They need to know how many people California has to set these. We're going to come back to this a little bit, but just remember this. Just remember this idea of you do not want power concentrated. You want power separate, spread out. And yet again, and okay, flip that way. So another term that will probably come up is checks and balances. So why did they choose three? Why didn't they just do what the Articles of Confederation did and say that states have all the power? It's because what if those states get corrupt? So you have to have what they call checks and balances. Each branch has to check and balance the other. All right? And this is a really good, remember, like, you can find all this on the internet as far as Google, at least these graphics. Okay. So whenever we talk about voting, or whenever we talk about law, obviously Congress is the one who makes the law. It goes to the president, and then if the judicial has to get involved, they will. All right. So right here, the court can declare laws unconstitutional. So if the president or the Congress passes a law that's not constitutional, the judicial branch can take care of that. All right. The executive branch or Congress makes a law. Guess who has to approve it? The president. However, there's a word that we probably need to know, and that's called veto. So the president can veto laws that Congress has passed. All right. So just keep this in mind. Keep this concept of checks and balances in mind. This is why our country is unique. All right. I think it's the best system of governing people ever created by man because it has this concept of power is separate. Now, can it be manipulated? Can people come in and take advantage? Absolutely. Okay. It's not perfect. I don't know if there is a perfect system of government. I guess that goes back to people not being greedy, Mr. James. If everybody was fair and honest, yeah, you could. All right. So nobody knew that better than the founding fathers. Every single one of us in this room and listening has lived under this system. We have never lived under one authoritarian person who controls everything, who makes the law. Just think about this. Think about if a policeman woke up one morning, went to his normal patrol route, and instead of 55, he says the speed limit is 35 now. And then he or she pulls you over, gives you a ticket. A month later, you go to court, and guess who you're standing in front of? That policeman. And you're having to try to appeal to that policeman. That is what living under the British Empire, King George III, monarchs was like. No, we want one person who makes the law, 55 miles an hour. We want another person to enforce the law. And then, if we want to, we can petition in front of someone else to say that that's not fair or I didn't do that. All right. So instead of just one, we have three. And that's the way you want it. You want things spread out. All right. Go to the next one, please. So coming back to what we were talking about a second ago, Articles of Confederation versus the U.S. Constitution. This is what was. This is what got us through the Revolution. I call Articles of Confederation the 1.0 version, if you will. Okay? And then what's the Constitution? It's that 2.0 version. It's the updated version. It's like Windows 11. And there's some things that both did right here. As you see, taxes, states could vote. There was a Congress. There was some military. But the U.S. Constitution, I would need 2 weeks probably to go through the entire U.S. Constitution and talk about, the differences between them. But instead of the states being in charge, guess what this says? Constitution is the supreme law. So, watch some YouTube videos over it. You learn social studies the same way you learn math, the same way you learn anything else, through repetition, through doing it over and over and over again. Watching a YouTube video 4 or 5 times over a span of a week. Watching some documentaries. So whenever we talk about civics and government, it's the breakdown of the Constitution and the federal government branches. So try to keep that concept in mind. Okay? All right. So whenever they wrote the Constitution, some people thought it was perfect. Okay? They're like, look, mainly like people like Thomas Jefferson. He's like, look, we have power split up into thirds. So we don't have to write down our freedoms. Okay? We're good. We don't have to worry about that. All right? Marshall, pick your head up, or you can go work in the lab if you want to. All right. So, Constitution broke it down. All right. Well, some people said, no, you're going to write our rights down. And thank goodness they did. Okay. So they're like, no, you're going to write our rights down. And the Constitution, some people wouldn't approve the Constitution until this was done. All right. So this is the Bill of Rights. As it says, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Anybody know how many total amendments there are now? So 1789 there was 10. 2026. Anybody know how many times we've added to or taken away from the Constitution since then? 17 times. So as of right now, there are 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. All right. So, obviously, some of these are, 19th Amendment, women gained the right to vote. 13th Amendment ended slavery. 14th Amendment defines American citizenship. I think the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. So you used to have to be 21 to vote. So they lowered that. I think the 27th Amendment was passed maybe in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. And it pretty much said that Congress can't give themselves a raise, I think, in the last year of their term. So, I think Congress started getting a little smart, and they're like, hey, before we leave, let's give the next class a raise. I haven't looked at too much into the 27th Amendment, but that's what that did. So, one thing that they're going to do is they may kind of quiz you a little bit on these rights. And as, citizen in America, as someone living in America, you should know this. All right? And I'll give you an example. So the First Amendment has 5 freedoms in it. And we'll talk about these. But I'll give you an example of what a test question might look like. They might give you a picture of protests. Okay? Doesn't matter what they're protesting. Okay? It might show you a picture of people protesting. And then it'll have these 5 freedoms. It'll have speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition the government. Petition the government means if you don't like a law, you can ask that it be changed. Guess what? During the American Revolution and under England, if you didn't like a law, you could protest it, and they did some. But there really wasn't an avenue to where you could protest a law. So they may show you a picture of people protesting, and you'll have to drag and drop the freedoms that apply to that these people are exercising. All right. So right here, this kind of shows a picture of someone on a box and talking to citizens, and maybe he's protesting something he doesn't like. All right. So he is definitely practicing free speech. He is practicing freedom to assemble. So people assembling like this. And then he is also practicing the right to petition the government. So if he's trying to get a law changed, let's say he wants to lower the voting age to 14, and he's sitting there trying to talk to these people, trying to convince them. All right. So understand that during the social studies test, they could give you a situation, and then you have to take these rights and apply it to that situation. What right are these people using? All right. So remember, like people always like, what's in the First Amendment? What freedoms are in the First Amendment? And usually people say like right to bear arms, right? Well, that's the Second Amendment. But there's 5 freedoms inside the First Amendment, and let that be an example of how important these are. Why didn't they just make one for each of these? Because they're like, these are the most important ones, and then we're going to put them number 1. All right. During COVID, a lot of people are, I was reading the other day about this court case, where they stopped some club. I can't remember what kind of club it was, but they were meeting all the time, right, for their club. And during COVID, they wouldn't let them do that, so they sued them, and they actually won. So a lot of these, a lot of times in U.S. history, these 5 get pressed. They get challenged. Obviously, the second one is the right to bear arms. There's a debate on whether or not that means that the Army has guns, or that means that you can have a gun underneath your bed. That is a conversation or a debate. The third one is really not. We haven't seen this. If you know what the word quartering means like housing. So under the colonial period before 1776, if a bunch of British soldiers showed up, guess what? You had to put them in your house, and you had to feed them. Now, keep this in mind. If I don't know, if a country invades America and we are under war, right? Let's say a country's crossing the Mississippi River, invading Arkansas. The U.S. government and the U.S. military can come into our homes and stay and use that. Okay? During wartime, things are different. Okay? But the British were doing it whenever under peacetime. They were just, and if you ever study a little bit of what kind of personality these British soldiers had, you should go research that a little bit. Number 4, no illegal arrests and searches. What do the police have to come into your home? A search warrant, right? It has to be like, hey, we think you have something. They just can't come into your home. We don't have time to go through all these, but just remember that some of them are double jeopardy, right? Can't be tried twice for the same crime. The 5th one is I plead the 5th. You hear that a lot in court. You don't have to testify against yourself, and you have a right to a fair and speedy trial. You ever heard that expression? They locked me up and threw away the key. That's what would happen under the British. What, 48 hours, Mike? How long can you be held for without being accused of a crime? 24 hours, 48 hours? I can't remember. 48? I think so. So you can't be held for more than 48 hours before they accuse you of a crime or you get set free. Yeah, you have a right to a jury trial. You can't have crazy bail. You know, back in the day, they would just set a bail so high, and this was before the days. Does anybody in here know how much you have to pay for your bail? Like if someone says you have a $50,000 bond, how much do you have to pay of that to get out? It's 10%, right? So, but before they would just, there was no 10%. You had to pay it all, and this 10th one, man, this 10th one's going to cause some issues throughout our history. And pretty much the 10th one says that if it's not in the Constitution, it's up to the states. All right. So slavery is going to fall underneath that. The right for women to vote fell underneath that. A lot of states allowed women to vote before the 19th Amendment. What's the one now that I was thinking of? Oh, medical marijuana. Nowhere in the Constitution does it talk about that. So that's why it's up to each state. Not to bring up topics that are too far off, but abortion, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that. And that's where this whole latest controversy comes from. So, even today, these 10 amendments are getting tested every single day. All right? So, if I could give you one piece of advice, make sure you know these 10. I mean, you should know them just so you know your rights, but it's also just to get through the social studies test. Because I guarantee you, somewhere through that test, they're going to ask you something regarding this. All right. You can switch that up. Can you zoom in on that? Can you pinch, please? And go up. We're not going to read all this. So that was civics and government. All right. I just want to talk just a little bit about history. All right. Obviously, I can't sit here and teach you all the history of America in a 90-minute thing, but I do want to just kind of point out some things. I would have some of y'all read it, but I don't know how well it would pick up on the mic. So we're just going to go through here, read some of this. We're keeping in mind the different forms of government throughout history. All right. So let's talk about the system of government in the United States. This is a representative democracy. In this form of government, the citizens vote to elect representatives who make and execute laws. To understand this form of democracy, it's helpful to first distinguish this democracy from other forms of government. All right? So keep this in mind. At the federal level, in Washington, D.C., we are actually a republic. All right? At the state, county, and city level, we are in my opinion, 100% democracy. All right? A democracy comes from ancient times. It means the rule of the people. So what does democracy mean? It pretty much means the majority rule. Okay? Which sounds great, right? You hear this all the time these days. Well, it should just be, sometimes you'll hear after a presidential election, one person, one vote. That's just how it should be. This electoral college should be gotten rid of. So, whenever we think about our form of government at the federal level, we are a republic. All right? And that's how come we have the electoral college that decides our president. All right? And guess what? There's the Constitution. So everything that the federal government does is based on law. It's not if you can get enough people to agree, it's what does the law say? Keep in mind, majority rule means 51 out of 100. So let's say we put up a vote that says you only have to pass one subject to get your GED, right? So we have reading, math, social studies, science. But let's just say we held a vote and said, hey, we just want to make it where you just have to pass one test. Well, if I can get 51 out of 100 people to agree with that, guess what? That's the new law. However, under a constitution, under a republic, we would go to the law. The law would say you have to pass all four, and that's where that would stop. All right. So keep this kind of keep this difference in mind. Whenever sometimes I hear federal politicians, like people in Washington, say our democracy. Sometimes it kind of irks me because I'm like, well, federally, we're not a democracy. At the state, county, and city level, we are. So that's just something that I find it fascinating to study this kind of stuff. Um, keep this one thing in mind also is that the majority rule sounds good, right? Okay. But the one thing that democracies don't do is they do not protect the minority. And I don't mean like social or race minority. I mean the 49. So if you can get 51 out of 100 people to agree upon something, all right, there for a while we were having, it seemed like every day I'd look at the news and there'd be a school shooting. Okay, horrible. Wish there was none. But if you were to have a national vote after like maybe the Vegas shooting or something, and you said, hey, should guns be legal? And if you gave that a vote over the entire country, I think you may get 51 out of 100 people to agree that there should be no guns. Okay? Or during COVID, if you're like, hey, I would like to go hang out with my friends, and they're like, no, you can't assemble. All right? Especially during COVID, I would say you could have got 51 out of 100 people to agree upon that, right? But the flaw with democracy is that it does not protect the minority, right? Freedom of religion. Everyone likes to think of Christianity as the prime example, okay? But if you wanted, there are people who worship other deities, okay? If I wanted to worship Baal, a god from the Old Testament, right? The freedom of religion protects me. Like let's say there's 100 people, 99 of them worship the Abrahamic God, either through Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, and I was the only one who worshiped Baal. Well, guess what? The freedom of religion protects me. It protects the one, even if the other 99 are doing something different. All right. So that is what's great about a republic, is because there's a law that says freedom of religion. So it doesn't matter which religion, doesn't matter which God, you are protected. All right. So just keep this concept in mind: is that they're going to talk the difference between democracies, anarchy, which means no government, means rule of the mob. Hopefully, everybody understands why that's not good. You don't want to live underneath that. Authoritarian rule right here, such as dictatorships, fascism. All right. So just keep in mind. Scroll up just a little bit, Jamie. Keep this in mind. Try to study a little bit about the U.S. system of government, the historic basis for the U.S. system. Why did George Washington and Benjamin Franklin create something new? Why didn't they just go do what other people were doing? So understanding this historic basis is definitely will help you on the test. Okay, pinch out and go to the next one. You're gonna have to pinch all the way out. There you go. And then just hit the right arrow. Hit. There you go. Oop, go back. All right. Just pinch in just a little bit on that top, please. There you go. Maybe the first two paragraphs. First three. There you go. Do it. Okay, let's talk about the role of the citizen, and then we're going to switch gears and talk about geography a little bit. One of the main things, half of the test is about civics and government. So, what is your role as a citizen, or as someone who lives in this country? Not everyone's a citizen. So, no, yeah, obey the law, vote, right? Provide for the common. I think it's common. It's not common defense. It's the common good. Okay, but citizenship is a special relationship between a person and a nation. The nation owes the person certain rights and guarantees. In the U.S. Constitution, does anybody know what the government promises us? What is in the Constitution? The government says they will protect our what? Three things. You may know. Life,
liberty,
pursuit of happiness. And this comes from John Locke. He was an Enlightenment thinker. He said the pursuit of property because most people were farmers, right? So Jefferson took that and just said the pursuit of happiness. All right? Sure, sure.
mentioning the change because he was saying,
Yeah.
I was reading that. Isn't it because only a certain group of people own land, and so that only pertains to
Very good. Yep. Yeah, and that's that's. I wish you were in my history class. We could dive deep, but just the land gentry they called them. Keep this in mind. Before, I don't even know. Before 100 years ago, you were born into whatever your situation you were in. So Mason, if your father was a cabinet maker, guess what you'd be? Cabinet maker. There was there was no upward mobility or downward mobility, really. You were either down or up. So the one great thing about our country is that we have a middle class. We have this idea that and the land of opportunity, right? So why did so many people come here? Because they come from a place where you're born into whatever position you're at. You know, one of the things we always heard as a kid is you could be president one day. That is not the same for most countries in the world. You had to be one of these land-owning elites. All right. So the Constitution. So whenever it says the nation owes the person certain rights and guarantees, if you go to the Constitution, so this is kind of where we have this contrast these days. Sometimes is some people look at this and they're like, okay, as long as the government, as long as no one's trying to kill me, as long as I'm free, okay, to do whatever I want or to do nothing, whatever. And as long as there's no barriers set up between me and what I want to do, right? So for a long time, African Americans, there was barrier after barrier after barrier. So this pursuit of happiness, just make sure there's nothing in my way. All right. So some people, I would say these are really small government people. This is it. This is all you can ask of the government. But, through the last 200 years, we've seen the U.S. government take on more and more and more roles. Social Security is just one example, right? I think it's good. I think there needs to be some kind of safety net for people once they get a little older. But some people think this should just be getting rid of. It's not the role of the government to do that. All right? And that's just where we get into different debates. All right, so the nation owes the person certain rights and responsibilities, but the person has certain rights, the person has certain obligations to the nation. Thus, citizens of the United States have both rights and responsibilities. All right. Let's see here. Our rights of citizenship are established in the first 10 amendments, right? So we already talked about those. One of the most fundamental rights of U.S. citizens is to participate in our nation's political life. So I would say if you were to ask the Founding Fathers, what's the one thing that people need to do as citizens? They would say vote. You have to vote. Nowadays voting is almost seen as I think by some people, as just something you can do or not do. Like it's not that big a deal if you miss voting day. Well, for a long time, it is what made it is how you showed your citizenship. Now, obviously, for a long time, it was only open to men, white men, landowning men. All right, so there's a lot of barriers that would set up. But the number one thing that I would say that they would say you should do is vote. Abraham Lincoln said that we have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So the by the people part requires the citizens take responsibility. And what are these responsibilities? Uphold the law. Even if you don't like it. Like sometimes I don't like driving 55. I'm in a hurry. So I stick it on 61 and I go. Alright? So upholding the law is our number one. The national welfare. That's what I was thinking of. As citizens, we also make contributions to the national welfare. Our taxes pay for services. Okay? And also by voting. Alright? So just keep this concept in mind that there are different forms of government. Why is ours special? I mean, there's so many reasons why it's special. I just kind of gave you a few here. But try to have that concept in mind before you take the test. Keep in mind this difference. Yes, Mr. Jackson.
What was that? All the wrong make contributions to the national welfare.
I mean, that was it, I think. Our taxes pay for services that the government provides. And voting. Yeah, there you go. I grew up under, or you can pinch out and hit next. One thing that I've seen a lot that people really don't talk about these days is the difference between communism and capitalism. Whenever I was a kid, I mean, one of my first main memories that I remember is the fall of the Berlin Wall. All right. So one of the things they'll talk about is just these different economic systems. It's fine. All right. So communism, socialism, capitalism. Obviously, we're a capitalistic country. But understanding the difference between now we are not a true capitalistic country. I would say maybe from 1880 to 1920 we were. It was just survival of the fittest, supply and demand. If you ever want to really dive deep, there is the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. I think 1911, I think maybe. Anybody know what a triangle shirtwaist used to be? Like sometimes you'll see, like 1900 women, they had the white puffy shirt with the buttons and stuff. Anyways, shirtwaist was just the fashion of the day. But this, I think like over 200 women died in this fire in this factory because a lot of reasons. But it was the idea of these people treated them like animals, gave them no breaks hardly. They were constantly worried they were stealing. They would lock the fire escapes because they were afraid women were going out there smoking. They had a bucket in every corner of this factory, and that was a fire extinguisher, a bucket of water. So, like, the problems with capitalism is there's no restraint on corporations. It's just all about the profit. So, especially under Franklin Roosevelt, if you study, he really expands the role of the U.S. government with his ABC programs and things like that. So I would say, I mean, I just thought of, I don't even know. I would say at this point, maybe we're 70% capitalist, 30% socialist, right? Because we do have welfare systems, we do have Social Security, we do have safety nets. If you really want to talk about capitalism, someone who champions that, Milton Friedman, Chicago style. Milton Friedman was the guy who believes capitalism, capitalism, capitalism. But as I said, if through this triangle shirtwaist fire, you see kind of the problems with that. So whenever we talk about parts of the test, this could pop up. I have seen it on there. So keep this idea of capitalism versus socialism versus communism. I would say that communism would be over here, because socialism is a logical step to communism. So, like I said, we don't hear about this much anymore. One of my very first memories is the fall of the Berlin Wall, and my dad explaining to me what communism was. So like I grew up during that, but I guess now, especially after 9/11 and stuff, it's just different. You don't hear much about this anymore, but it could be on the test. So. Is that it? Okay. All right, real fast. I appreciate y'all's attentiveness. I do want to show you this geography. Oh, let's see that. I'm gonna show y'all. I do want to show you. I hope y'all can still hear me. I do want to show y'all. I do want to show y'all a little bit about some map quizzes. This is here, let me erase this. This is Satera map quizzes. It's a very good website where you can come and do map quizzes. Excuse me. It would be great if you knew where the 50 states were. I don't think it's going to make or break. I don't think it's going to make or break you on the test. But one thing that could would be the world's continents and oceans. Okay? So I would say if you could practice one thing, maybe just knowing where the 5 oceans and the 7 continents are. All right, real fast. Let's see if the class here can get 100. Where's the Indian Ocean at? This one? Here? Right there. Very good. That's the Indian Ocean. Pacific? This one? Very low. Very good. Pacific's over here. Where's Africa at? Yeah, Africa.
Oh, where's the continent?
Yes. Yeah. Right above. Okay, very good. Awesome. Europe? Right above Africa. Good job. South America? Very good right here. Australia? Bottom right. Very good. There you go. Arctic Ocean? Very top. Very good. Okay, and like whenever I was growing up, maybe I just missed it, but there wasn't a Southern Ocean. It was just, I don't know. But I think nowadays that, like, if there's an Arctic Ocean, theoretically there's probably like a Southern Ocean. Atlantic Ocean, right here off our east coast. Obviously, we live in North America. Antarctica's down here, and then Asia's right here. We got 100. All right? Yes, sir. Through this. Just through this. It wasn't like I read an article and I was like, oh. No, you're good. No, good. Gotcha.
You learned about the Southern Ocean, but you didn't learn much about the Arctic Ocean.
That makes sense.
Trade routes.
I think I remember 4 oceans, but now I have to try to say 5 oceans. So, am I good right here? Can you see? Okay. Okay. just keep in mind a little bit. What did it say at the beginning? 10% geography. Can't remember. 10% geography. 15. Good. So 1.5 questions out of 10 will be something about geography. All right. And we're coming to the end of this, wrapping it up soon. And because we're going to work a little bit, I do want to work a little bit, show y'all a couple of problems about some math coming up. So, all right, real fast. At every one of y'all centers, at the Newport Center, Mark Tree Center, definitely here in Jonesboro, you have these visual literacy books. All right, visual literacy. Mr. James, do you know what the word literacy means? Anybody? Yeah, okay. It's close. Anybody have a little bit more specific answer? It is your ability to read and write. Okay? So if someone can read and write, they are literate. Okay? Right? And that's why if someone can't read and write, do you know what they call or what illiterate? This is a little what's this word? What's this word? Okay, so remember if you see IL on the front prefix, then you know it means like not. Or I'm not sure exactly what it means, but it just means non, like non-legal, non-literate. Okay. So they are going to test what they call visual literacy. So if literacy is your ability to read and write, visual literacy is your ability to look at tables and graphs. This orange book is tables and graphs. All right, so pie charts, line graphs, bar graphs. It is also your ability to look at scales, charts, and diagrams. This is really, I see this a lot in the science test. So this is really more geared toward the science test. And I would say this visual literacy is really maybe the reading and the social studies, even math. I mean, it could be, I would say, all the subjects. And then remember, for social studies, 100% you need to work through this book. The last week and a half of our 8-week cohort that we do is revolves around these books. Okay, so keep in mind, yes, it is about reading paragraphs, answering questions, but it's also about your visual literacy. 3 things that I want to talk about for social studies is maps. Okay, so why do I have all this here? Why do I go through map? I mean, I just like maps anyways. But maps, definitely going to have questions regarding maps. All different kinds too. Physical maps, which shows like rivers, mountains, population maps, population density maps. So any kind of map you can think of, you may get on the social studies test. Photographs. Anybody know when the first photograph was? I don't know the exact date, but I think I know the range. Well, the first picture? Oh no, I don't have time getting little. I think the very first. Jamie, you got your phone on you? Mike, you got your phone? I'm gonna say it's 1846, somewhere in Paris, and they just took a picture of the city. And later on, they saw someone shining someone's shoe, like 26. My apologies. Okay. I think by 1840s, 50s, you start having like the handheld ones that people start seeing. But so 1826 was the first photograph. All right. So ever since then, people have been using photographs to tell history. All right. And you're going to get all kinds of different photographs. What do they say about a picture, Mr. James? Is worth how many words? A picture is worth 1,000 words. Can someone explain that to me? Can someone unpack that for me? What does that mean? Can someone give me an example? Well, Kind of, I would say that. Uh, let me show you an example real fast. Paintings of slavery. Let me see. Let me do this. I give credit to photographs for doing a lot to spur and to bring more awareness. Let me see if I can find a better example here. So if we look at this painting right here, okay, we all know slavery is horrible, especially if you study it. You know just how much more horrible uh, sugar plantations were than cotton. I'm not saying cotton was good at all. I'm not saying that. But sugar plantations were on a whole nother level of brutality. Okay, so this right here just kind of shows that, right? And it's a painting, so it doesn't. It kind of evokes maybe a little, I don't know what kind of feelings it evokes, but it doesn't. It can't show how bad it was. All right. One of the main reasons, especially in abolition in America, was pictures of slavery. All right. And probably the most famous picture is this right here. Yeah. Peter, a slave from Louisiana. What year? Okay. So, so they in the 1850s they started showing pictures of this stuff. So that dramatically changes things. Okay. Let's see here. Got at least a minute to do this. The same concept goes for war, right? So if I show a picture of war, where's his battle? Oh, that's Lewis and Clark. Let's see here. Paintings of war. Here, I'll give you a good one. Antietam is the bloodiest day in American history. Here's a painting of the Battle of Antietam. Would love to go there someday. It shows 3 columns of Union soldiers coming up the right. You got the Confederates. There's an old Duncan church back there in the background. So one of the reasons why war was glorified for a long time is because you only saw war through paintings. All right, it looks heroic. Like I could see how someone in 1850 or 1860 looking at paintings of war would be like, I've got to go do that. All right. However, one of the reasons why war is not as glorified as it used to be, and thank goodness, is because you have pictures of Antietam. That's the same Duncan Church. All right. Can't see that as well. Let's see if I can get a better picture there. There we go. Nope. Hopefully you can see. This is the sunken road. If you know anything about Antietam, I think like 10,000 men died just in this one sunken road, they called it. So one thing that starts happening during the Civil War is you start having pictures of war. And there is nothing that makes me want to go anywhere near this stuff through these pictures. Right? So one thing they'll do in the social studies test is they will give you pictures, and you will have to make determinations based off those pictures. And whenever I asked Mr. James, whenever he said a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So, so I could sit up here all day and talk about how bad war is, right? So I can talk about 26,000 casualties at Antietam. I can talk about 30,000 casualties at Gettysburg. I can talk about about 10,000 casualties on D-Day during World War II. Or I could just show you this picture. right? And it would probably do as much to explain to you the horrors of war. And just so you know, thank goodness, right? So even during World War I, I'm sorry, that's about 50 years after this, war was still a little glorified, but it definitely wasn't like it was before. And by this point in time in our world, I mean, I think most people agree that war is bad. We should avoid war at all costs. Oh, I mean, yeah. Absolutely. And it also ended monarchs because people were like, okay, I'm not going to go kill myself for this monarch, king, what, who? So World War I did a lot, but it did end monarchs. And then editorial cartoons. I don't have too much time to talk about editorial cartoons. Editorial cartoons, they're in this book. Most of them are political. So just keep in mind, maps, photographs, editorial cartoons. There's a blue visual literacy book at your center. Please use that. Okay. There you go, show one. You're not typing. Oh. You're good. Editorial cartoons. I always like to talk about how back in the day, most people weren't going to sit there and read a big article. All right. And that's pretty funny. Well, it's may not be the best topic today, but just keep this concept in mind. If you just want to find one, back in the day, people were not going to sit there and read this whole big paragraph about anything political or something like that. And a lot of times, people wanted a little joke, a little humor in their stuff, right? Yeah, very good. It may not pop up. The plumbing is in dangerous state. I've seen that one before. I'm trying to think if that was that's King. That's a British person I know right there. They're cutting up. I think that's England and France. Get rid of that. Get rid of this right here. Hit no thanks in there. The plum pudding is in danger. Actually, scroll down real fast. See if that's Britain and France carving up the world. So it's the British Museum. I just don't know who that. I don't know what that is. Okay. So this right here shows Britain and it shows France and this like Turkey and it represents the world. You can see Europe, Pacific, and it's just can anybody tell me what that's trying to say or what that's alluding to? Just exactly like England and France gobbling up the entire country, the entire world. I'm sorry. Obviously, very military uniform, so it's military. Two militaries carving up the world. Very good. Very good. Political cartoons is ask yourself, what's being made fun of there? And then you know the point of view of the creator. It's okay. Appreciate it. What's being made fun of? So remember, this right here says more. You know, if you were a person living back in those days, you would know exactly what that is. All right, real fast. Let's go over the last one. I got 7 minutes. So, real fast, do mean, median, and mode since you're right here. All right. Do you have to know math on the social studies test? Yes. Mean, median, and mode. Why do you get a calculator in the social studies test? Is because you have to know the mean or the average. Okay? So you need to know how to find the average of a set of numbers. And as this says right here, this says 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. So if you had 5 numbers, and I'm just going to represent these by letters, you add them all up and you divide by however many you have. Okay? So on the social studies test, you will have to find the average of things, maybe. Excuse me. Also, in the social studies test, you may be asked to find the median, which is the middle value. All three of these are called the central tendency. Like, kind of, where is center? Where is average? I wish the one. This is just a personal thing of mine. I wish you could take the average of your tests. Okay, so like if you scored 5 points above in reading, well, you could score 4 or 5 points below in math, and it would equal out. Like, I kind of wish that, but I don't make the rules. So know that sometimes you might have to find the median, and then sometimes you might have to find the mode, which is the one that occurs the most often. If you're not sure about what mean, median, and mode is, you can Google it, obviously. You can come ask a teacher. You can watch a YouTube video over it. Okay? So, but just remember, there is math on the test. Okay? The one that occurs the most often, yes.
As a math teacher, I always teach my students, the middle of a highway is called median. So median is the middle. Mode is a slant rhyme for most. It almost sounds the same. Mode means most.
Yeah.
And mean, my teacher's being mean and making me do all of them. That's how you remember. That's the one where you have to add them all together and divide.
Average. Remember, y'all, we just did this today to try to start having workshops that are focused on certain subjects. All right? And I hope y'all appreciate the time and the effort. I appreciate y'all's time and effort. And remember, as soon as you get your GED, I sure hope you go to ASU-Newport and you can be my history student. And that would be great.